As you know, many of our listeners and viewers have seen, we do various podcasts here to help with finance. And we have, over the months, have had various conversations with various people, principals of organizations all around finance. And what we have done is taken a lot of feedback and acted upon them. For those that don't know, I'm delighted to have Avi Barr, partner at BBS Law. We'd like it in conversation to use your infinite and vast knowledge to help many of our listeners, the professional landlords, the people who are starting their journey, well versed in it, and really all the people who need your services in the world of legals. First and foremost, tell me a bit about BBS Law and yourself.
Okay, so BBS Law has been on a very interesting journey over the last 6 months. We acquired the firm of OGR Stock Denton in Finchley, and the impact on that for our clients has been the fact that we now have a team of around 15 property and finance lawyers who are regularly helping borrowers, clients that you will come across, and people doing similar sort of work with property refinances, purchases involving finance, exits from finance, and that could be long-term finance or shorter-term bridging finance as well. We see a lot of this type of work. We are familiar with all different types of asset classes, whether it's land, whether it's retail, residential, portfolios, single asset, HMOs. And so therefore, we've probably got a fairly good insight into the market that you work in and the people you work with.
Amazing. Okay, I want to jump in with some questions that have been raised for us. Every lender and every client will need a lawyer. From my perspective, as a mortgage broker, consultant to individuals and companies, there are bottlenecks. There are always bottlenecks in this, and we have two predominantly noticeable bottlenecks in the journey, and that is liaising with valuers and getting that valuation in on time and the expectations matched, which is always an exciting and nail-biting journey, and also the liaising with solicitors. Now, what I would love to do is gain your experience, because you're sitting behind the scenes and working on behalf of either the lender or the borrower, and sometimes both. I'd love to gain your insight to some of the issues that are raised, and some of the things that maybe, if people are presented either from myself or borrowers or lenders, that could actually oil the wheels for everyone's benefit. Where do you see those sticking points happen? What do you see the delays happen? And can they be alleviated?
So great question. Far be it from me as a lawyer to pass the buck, but it is a system, as you correctly point out. And if the wheels are oiled properly, it moves a lot more slickly through the process. So a few little bullet points and things I always tell brokers and clients when I meet them: be organized. If you are trying to take a finance on a portfolio, make sure you've lined up all the relevant paperwork, whether it's the safety certificates, whether it's the leases or the tenancies. Make sure you're organized before you even start the process, either with us as the lawyers or yourselves as the broker. Another really, really important point is to be realistic on timescales. Very, very few deals these days happen in a week. Yes, you see them on LinkedIn, but question whether they really do happen. And therefore, if you just are relatively sensible in your expectations, you'll find that the process goes a lot more smoothly, because everyone is actually working to a sensible timescale. There's less pressure, less chance of mistakes. I think probably the most important point is choose professionals that understand this market. The finance market is not simple. It requires an understanding of what the lenders want, particularly with the more short-term lenders who are more focused on getting the exact information they need. So go to people that are experienced professionals in the sector. Okay,
brilliant. So that dovetails beautifully into my next question, the term dual representation. Rather than me asking about it, tell everybody what dual representation is and the benefits and pitfalls of having that.
Sure. So there are essentially two concepts here. There are situations of sole representation, where the borrower has one solicitor and the lender has another solicitor. And then we have dual representation, which is where both parties share the same solicitor. There are advantages and disadvantages of both. On a smooth transaction, one solicitor dealing with both parties, absolutely great. One person looking at the information and looking at the impact for the borrower and the lender, and hopefully reaching the conclusion that the deal makes sense for both and getting it done. The challenges and bottlenecks, as you might want to call them, in that scenario arise when there's a problem with the property, and perhaps the borrower has got information that, should the lender be aware of, they may be reluctant to do the loan, and that can sometimes put the solicitor in a very difficult situation, and therefore mean either he's got to pull away because of a conflict of interest, or just practically there is a sticking point as to what should be disclosed and what should not be disclosed. So for me, as a rule of thumb, unless a transaction is what we would call vanilla in the business, a very straightforward transaction, it's generally safer to go down the dual representation route, although if the parties are comfortable, then sole representation can absolutely work.
Right. It has to be noticed some lenders don't allow dual representation.
And there's good reasons for that.
The common theme with all transactions is this proof of funds. And I have found some lenders require the proof of funds for a purchase. They have to go back sometimes an unrealistic time frame. I mean, some say, well, where did you get that money to buy this purchase? Some lenders want to know source of wealth. And when it's a long-established business, proof of source of wealth can go back generations.
Sure.
Right? Is it down to you as a lawyer, or is it down to the lender's requirements? Where does this go? Because sometimes I get clients saying, "Are you kidding me? You want me to go back that far back and prove this is how we did it? We bought property, we gained the capital, and we developed our portfolio. What do you want more from that?" But sometimes lenders want more. How and what? Tell me.
I'll start with a very interesting little illustration of that. I recently acted on quite a large refinance for a family that the source of wealth was a printing company pre-Second World War in Germany. And the bank only lent once I was able to certify that the stamps within the book that they published were authentic and showed that they'd had a printing business in Germany in 1937. So we can go to ridiculous extremes on this, and it's tremendously frustrating. There are two issues here. The source of wealth, which as lawyers makes less difference to us because ultimately we're more focused on source of funds, that in other words, the funds that are being introduced to our account. Firms will have different policies, but ultimately it's about being transparent. And there is not always a simple answer, but as long as there is a coherent response, most pragmatic lawyers will be able to formulate a view as to the legitimacy of the funds that are being introduced.
It's all to do with money laundering. That's the whole thing.
It's probably our biggest responsibility to the industry as professionals to make sure that funds that are introduced are legitimate, and therefore it is an area we are cautious about, but sensible. So there'll be many occasions where a client will provide me with information I'm not quite satisfied with, but perhaps with an accountant's letter or with some other supporting information, we can form a view. And that's why it's very important when you do these sorts of transactions that you're dealing with firms that understand these issues, and you're dealing with lawyers that have got enough experience to be able to take those decisions. Because if you're working with a firm that employs relatively low skilled people on the job, they may not know how to deal with these challenges when they arise.
I'm coming from a very biased opinion because, as you quite rightly noted, having the right people work with you at the right time is fundamental. We've done a huge number of transactions over the past, and for us to have that open dialogue, to know exactly where the stages are, manage expectations, working with the lenders. If we take a step back, and obviously you're immersed into the whole world of conveyancing and transactional finance, what do you see here and now, any legal quirks or things in the future that the listeners can say, actually, you know what, we need to put a note in the diary, or if we've got portfolios, anything kind of modifications that would be quite relevant to everybody here to say, actually, yeah, we need to do something or think about?
So obviously it's very difficult in a short conversation like this to go into too much detail, but I'm very happy to share a couple of really crucial bullet points, really, of items that borrowers and brokers alike should be really aware of that are either relevant now or coming up. And the biggest of these is the Building Safety Act 2022, which is a relatively new and untested piece of legislation, but essentially affects people that are either borrowing or purchasing blocks of flats or individual flats. And frankly, any block that is more than 11 metres, and certainly any blocks that have got cladding, need very careful scrutiny. There is a raft of legislation, even down to the fact that extending leases could potentially remove certain protections that a leaseholder may have. And people just don't know these things. So anything that involves flats or blocks of flats, tread really carefully and make sure you get absolute expert advice before you proceed too far down the line, particularly with a purchase. There is various climate change legislation coming through. which won't directly impact on values of property, but will impact on requirements that people have in terms of checks that need to be made to make sure that buildings aren't likely to suffer in the future due to climate change. Lenders may start using that as a factor as to whether to lend and how much to lend. We're not seeing that yet. Borrowers need to be aware that there are various changes coming up which involve energy performance and energy efficiency, both in commercial and residential property. There are going to be changes coming up over the next 3 to 5 years, and people need to be aware of those. Again, there's more detail in it, but just flagging it.
Sure, EPC is a big thing with a lot of lenders. A lot of lenders are currently incentivizing with slight rate reductions for properties that are banded A to C.
Yeah.
But that's an incentive at the moment. Soon it's going to be legislation, which is going to cause a number of problems, which I think a number of people are seeing it possibly as an opportunity. Serial investors say actually they can, once they take a property, they can upgrade it. But it's going to be, and somebody with an existing portfolio really does need to think ahead, because some of those changes will need to be implemented. So I think that's quite important.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a trend in bridging, development, HMOs, portfolio? Is there something that actually you're seeing a bit of a steer towards or steer away from?
It's a very interesting question. I'm actually seeing a growth in PD, permitted development projects, of office to residential. And I'm convinced that we're still seeing so much realignment of office requirements in the sector that buildings that perhaps weren't going to come vacant on their leases for another 5 or 10 years, with COVID and with more remote working and flexible working, as office requirements change, there are more office blocks coming onto the market, which are providing opportunities for investors that like those sort of PD schemes of office to resi.
Right.
So that's absolutely an interesting area.
There was a surge with permitted development.
There absolutely was, particularly post-COVID, but there's still quite a lot of it. An interesting development going the other way is the new challenges in particular areas of trying to convert properties from houses to HMOs. Most local authorities are either implementing or planning on implementing Article 4 directions, which prevent those changes being automatically permitted. And where planning permission is required, there's so much uncertainty and, frankly, unlikelihood of those applications getting through.
Yeah. So I heard when for HMOs, it was definitely in my space a huge push. Everyone was doing it. The yields were exceptionally high, and there's been a much more like a pull on the reins from the local authorities.
Sure.
I haven't actually got under the skin of why they've done that, because you're creating more houses. I think environmentally maybe and the spaces, but for local authority that actually resolves the ever-growing problem of housing. So I've never really fully understand it, but there's definitely a reluctance from local authorities to grant permission for HMOs inside the local authorities, that's for sure.
I think the problem with the industry is, whilst there's some really efficient and socially conscious operators, there are a number of people that see this as an opportunity, frankly, to cram as many people into a smaller space as possible.
Right.
There are constant stories in the media of illegal or unlawfully operated HMOs. And I think, frankly, they give local authorities a bad name when it comes to questions of how they are housing people that require housing. Private sector landlords always cop it from the point of view of they're all in it just to make money. And the HMO model, frankly, doesn't do much of the overall value of and the quality of the properties. It is all about income. And I think that model is something that local authorities are reluctant to embrace.
Have you seen a significant downturn, increase, plateauing of business? Because media loves to, there's no story unless it's a bad story. From my perspective, we were very busy pre-November, took a nosedive in November when the markets got a bit shook up. But the level certainly of refinances are there, people coming out their rates, but and we've seen a steady increase in that. Development, because of the cost of funds have been significantly reduced, certainly big developments, people are slightly wary. But again, your knowledge to know, have you seen, what have you seen any trends? Because you're sitting on both sides. It's an ideal opportunity to get information.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think particularly sort of 3 to 4 months ago, where there was real uncertainty about where interest rates were heading, we saw a massive downturn in projects that involved a development with a sort of 12 to 18 month lifespan. So where you were going to bring flats onto the market, very hard to know what those values were going to be and whether people could even be able to afford the mortgages. I think the general consensus now is that we're moving towards the peak of interest rates. There may be 1 or 2 more rate rises, and we may never go back for many, many years to the 0.5% base rate, but we probably are on our way down within the next 12 months. And I feel that both the economy and the finance industries are acting with a bit more certainty. Rates are generally lower than they were, certainly longer term fixed rates. You'll know this far more than me. I've always had the view that even if the market is struggling a little bit, all we need to do is up our game, because when the market is struggling, people are more cautious about where they get their professional work done. They're more cost conscious, but they're also more conscious of making sure if they do go for a loan, it's going to be delivered for them. And if we up our game, which we can do because we're a competent and very decent firm of lawyers doing this sort of work, even a market downturn actually doesn't faze us. It creates new opportunities. So the downturn itself hasn't really affected us per se as a firm. We've stayed strong, but there's definitely been projects that were put on ice. But we're actually seeing a fairly healthy return back to those sort of developments now. Short-term finance, interestingly, that the amount of competition in the bridging market has meant that even though interest rates are at 4%, the bridging lenders that we're working with are still offering pretty much the same rates that they were doing 12 months ago, which is fascinating because there's such an oversupply of bridging lenders. And if you're in that market, it's actually probably quite tough because you're not making the returns that you are, but you have no choice. But for borrowers, you have a real pick of bridging lenders offering very similar terms, and then comes down to who can you trust to deliver, whose processes do you trust the most, and frankly, who do you want to work with that will give you the easiest ride through, because that's a massive thing.
Totally agree. The final one, and it's a bit of a cheesy question because I could probably answer it for you better than you could answer it for yourself, is BBS Law, your USP.
Thank you for giving me this wonderful opportunity to sell myself. Look, it's very simple to me, Mayor. Law firms can work in different ways. We see ourselves very much as strategic partners to our clients. So if a client needs something done, for us, it's not just enough to get it from A to B. We're here to help and support them in their businesses. We don't mind taking a longer term view. We don't mind if a project takes a bit longer because we've provided the input which makes sure that the client gets a better result because someone's actually thought about what they're doing rather than just gone through with the process. If we see an issue, rather than just plow on, we'll advise the client of that at an early stage. So it's very much for us about being a partner with the client rather than just delivering a product. It's a service-led business for us, and that's the way the best law firms work.
The truth is you and your team are unbelievably proactive. Unbelievably proactive for us. And again, for all the serial investors and the portfolio landlords and people who are well versed in it, it's not only about price. Everybody wants everything. Sure. Everybody wants price, speed, delivery, whatever it is. But there has to be a realistic, as you said before, realistic time frame and ideas of where your objectives need to get to. And I think once you've got all those in place, the transaction can be as smooth sailing as possible. And sometimes, you are going to possibly pay a bit more, but the reality is you're paying less because the mistakes of and things like that are mitigated. So I absolutely get that. I concur with that. And you are our first port of call. And thank you very much for doing this. You have anything to ask me?
I'll finish with one question for you.
Yeah.
I have lots of borrowers that say, I don't need a mortgage broker. I'll go straight to the lender. I've got a great relationship. And we always say to them, that's a mistake. But you'll know far more than me as to why they're better off going to a really decent mortgage broker.
I can't think of one, but so a mortgage broker, the truth is there's two parts to finance. You've got the homeowner residential arm, and then you've got the commercial sector, the portfolio loans and all those types of businesses. There's a huge amount online. If you wanted to remortgage your own house or buy, you can do, there's lots of search engines you can do and comparison sites and things like that. The collation of information, you can do yourself. When you get to the more professional side of things, you're already a portfolio landlord, it's your business, you understand the business. More often than not, remember we're getting, as you no doubt you're getting updates daily of the different changes, the variances, and from a perspective from a borrower, they have got their own perspective of what they've got, right? And they're living in their bubble of running their own business. we have the benefit of actually seeing various other businesses doing things in different ways that are massively beneficial to the client, and they can structure deals so for their end game, their exits or their refinance, whatever their term is, to structure it in that way. From my perspective, from using plan funding, the truth is, we've been in it since 1997. When the transactions are both large, complicated, needing a bit of TLC, we often pick up the phones to heads of credit, the principals of these,
and even to us lawyers.
Exactly. And for us, that is, it's not a case of the computer says no.
Yeah.
It's very much a personal relationship. It is the world is going in an AI world, but the truth of the matter is these deals are so specific to the needs of the clients. It can't just be pick up the phone, type it in, this is what you're going to do. You have to understand the transaction. And so whether you use us or other people, to use a broker to actually understand it and then to put it out potentially to a number of institutions to work and get the right thing for the clients, can potentially save the client huge amounts, but also, more importantly, work towards timescales. Invariably, things, as crop up along the way, can be ironed out. We have a team dedicated to different parts of that business. So for us, that would really oil the wheels of a transaction.
Just to finish off by saying that, absolutely right. When we work with plan funding, there are two massive plus points for us: collation and organization of information, which is so important. Pretty much any of your clients that have come to us are well organized. You've got copies of their information. They're ready to move forward with the transaction. And we also know that if we've got a problem, we've got knowledgeable people that will understand the issue that we're facing and will work together with us. And borrowers themselves often don't quite have that sophistication of knowledge, particularly of finance products. So for us, that makes a big difference and often helps deals get through quicker, with less pain and stress, which is what the name of the game is.
Absolutely. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've done so many podcasts with lenders, but this is giving a different insight and angle. I think a huge number of people will benefit from your expertise. So thank you very much for joining me.
Really enjoyed it, and
wish you well.